All right, so I will read the English translation of Hanerut Halalu, the meditation said over the candles. These lights we kindle upon the miracles, the wonders, the salvations, and the battles which you, God, performed for our forefathers in those days at this season through your holy priests. During all 8 days of Hanukkah, these lights are sacred. We are not permitted to make ordinary use of them, but to look at them in order to express thanks and praise to your great name for your miracles, your wonders, and your salvations. So this Hanukkah, what I've tried to do is remind everybody of the 4 levels of observance of study of every holiday, including Hanukkah: the historical textual level, the ritual, the symbolic metaphoric, and also the inner and transformative. I've given examples of each. The past 2 nights, I've really dug into the historical text of 1st Maccabees and 2nd Maccabees. I hope I've intrigued you enough to find them online or get a Bible that has them in it, because they are incredible texts. As I said last night, there's a great wealth of scholarship on this period, more than you can possibly imagine. So if you're historically inclined, you're going to love this history. It's filled with battles and intrigue and espionage, betrayal, rebellions. It's really wonderful history written by some brilliant people. Tonight, as I wrote in the email, I want to turn to the work of Stephen Pressfield, and a little bit about Stephen Pressfield, my connection with him, and then this wonderful, wonderful book, The War of Art. So several years ago, when I was teaching my adult education up at what was then called the University of Judaism, I was teaching a class on Jewish spirituality. And one of the ways that I begin is to talk about the Yetzer Hara, the destructive shape within the human being. Now, most folks who teach Jewish spirituality start on the inner life, the deeper dimension, but the Yetzer Hara, the shape toward human destructiveness, is always lurking about. So the problem is that if people focus on meditation, for example, and deep spiritual experience, the Yetzer Hara is lurking in the background, because those very people can be suffering with either anxiety, depression, anger, defensiveness. So what I discovered is it doesn't matter how much people meditate. Once they get back into the real interpersonal realm, their thoughts, feelings, and emotions can get riled up. So I made a decision, probably back in the 1980s, that I would teach virtue. In those days, I called it Musar first, and then get down to the spiritual experiential dimension. So I began my course on the Yetzer Hara, the destructive shape within us that interferes with our wanting to live what I'll call now virtuous lives. So Stephen Pressfield appears in my class, and he's a handsome, big guy, beaming face. And afterwards, he comes up to me and shakes hands and says, "I'm Stephen Pressfield." And he tells me who the connection was, a friend of a friend. And he said, "I hear this theme that you're teaching, and the theme that you're teaching maps right onto this book, The War of Art," by the way, published 20 years ago, where he talks about resistance. So we had a talk afterwards, and the idea of the Yetzer Hara and his idea of resistance map right onto each other. So his idea of resistance is, like the Yetzer Hara, no matter what you have in mind, what kind of person you want to be, whether it's spiritual, moral, creative, whatever it is you want to do, for many people, there's a resistance within. Now, here's the interesting thing. Let's say a person is phenomenally talented at basketball, and they have the right coaches, and everything is great. They're the best player in the NBA. That doesn't mean at home that they're a good person. Now, they might be, and we hope they would be. They are 2 completely different skill sets. So many people think that because they're successful in one area, that automatically translates over to something else. It actually doesn't. So when we have to master that new skill. So oftentimes I've seen very successful people say, "I don't know why this is so hard. I'm so successful in this other thing that I do." That's the resistance talking. So Pressfield shows in his book that some things come easier to us, which you might say the Yetzer Hara lets us do, and then some things are very difficult. Now, why is this during Hanukkah? Because as we go toward the inner life dimension of Hanukkah, we realize is there are things we really want to accomplish in life, and I'm going to put the primary focus on being a virtuous, rational, wise, and deep person. So when I conceive the work that I teach, there are these four dimensions: to be virtuous, rational, wise, and deep. People are able to be virtuous, rational, wise, and deep, and translate these ideas into a discipline, in my mind, live objectively, measurably better lives. So when people come to my classes or a counseling session, what they tell me is, I'm committed to virtue, I'm committed to being rational, I want to be wise and regulate, and I want to engage in depth. I don't know why I can't. I get triggered. My emotions get the better of me. I can't control my schedule. I want to do it, but I don't do it. That's the Yetzer Hara, what Pressfield calls resistance. So I just want to read a little bit of Stephen Pressfield. It's just genuinely beautiful literature, this book, War of Art. Break through the blocks and win your inner creative battles. This is the battle against the Yetzer Hara, the spiritual transformative side of Hanukkah. Remember, we have the history and text, the ritual, symbolic and metaphoric, and then the transformative is fight the darkness, fight the Yetzer Hara, find that light that you want to shine into your life, and help it shine into your life. So I'm just going to read a little bit of his preface. Stephen Pressfield. Most of us have two lives: the life we live and the unlived life within us. Between the two stands resistance. Have you ever bought a treadmill and let it gather dust in the attic? Ever quit a diet, a course of yoga, meditation? Have you ever bailed on a call to embark on a spiritual practice? Dedicate yourself to a humanitarian calling. Commit your life to the service of others. Have you ever wanted to be a mother, a doctor, an advocate for the weak and helpless, to run for office, crusade for the planet, campaign for world peace, or preserve the environment? Late at night, have you experienced a vision of the person you might become, the work you could accomplish, the realized being you were meant to be? Now more to his point. Are you a writer who doesn't write? A painter who doesn't paint? An entrepreneur who never starts a venture? Then you know what resistance is. Resistance is the most toxic force on the planet. It is the root of more unhappiness than poverty, disease, and erectile dysfunction. To yield to resistance deforms our spirit. It stunts us and makes us less than we are and were born to be. If you believe in God, and Pressfield says, and I do, you must declare resistance evil, for it prevents us from achieving the life that God intended when God endowed each of us with our own unique genius. Genius is a Latin word. The Romans used it to denote an inner spirit, holy and inviolable, which watches over us, guiding us to our calling. The writer with his genius, an artist paints with hers. Everyone who creates operates from this sacramental center. It is our soul's seat, the vessel that holds our being in potential, our star's beacon, our Polaris. Every sun casts a shadow, and the genius's shadow is resistance. As powerful as is our soul's call to realization, so potent are the forces of resistance arrayed against it. Resistance is faster than a speeding bullet, more powerful than a locomotive, and harder to kick than crack cocaine. We're not alone if we've been mowed down by resistance. Millions of good men and women have bitten the dust before us. And here's the biggest bitch. We don't even know what hit us. I never did. From age 24 to 32, resistance kicked my ass from the east to the west, and east coast to the west coast and back again 13 times, and I never knew it existed. I looked everywhere for the enemy and failed to see it right in front of my face. I won't continue with the preface. I just want to read one thing to her, one thing at the end of the preface, and this is going to jar you a little bit. He says, Hitler wanted to be an artist. At 18, he took his inheritance, 700 kronen, and moved to Vienna to live and study. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts and later to the School of Architecture. Ever seen one of his paintings? Neither have I. Resistance beat him. Call it an overstatement, but I'll say it anyway. It was easier for Hitler to start World War II than it was for him to face a blank square of canvas. I don't know if that's true, but I do know enough about that evil that overcomes people. That evil man in Vienna trying to find his way. I'm going to go along with Pressfield, a sense of failure, and then he found someone to blame. This is historically true that he began to write about his hatred for the Jews of Vienna. At the same time, he failed as an art student. Let's say this is not true. Let's say there was something else going on, but look at each of us. When we face this resistance, we get at someone else for standing in our way. We blame someone else for triggering us. We blame someone else for dousing out the light of the person we want to be. It's so easy to hold other people accountable for our failures. And for me, one of the deepest themes of Hanukkah, for me, in the spiritual and moral quest, is personal accountability. Personal accountability. Our minds are always on the lookout, are vigilant for threat, always on the lookout for something on the outside getting in our way. As mammals and as primates, are they taking their food, our status, our mate, our young? For us human beings, the things that we want to control are legion. We want control over our lives much more than we want control over our character. And when we can't control our lives, it's very easy to scan the external environment for the causes of our suffering, or even to self-loathe and attack yourself and realize even that self-attacking voice is the resistance in the darkness stopping you from getting to your work. So when I met Steven Pressfield and he gave me the book, I have this beautiful inscription that he gave me, perhaps you can see. And he and I met, and we've had a great relationship ever since. I want to share with you that during the COVID shutdown, I had this remarkable moment in my life. Steven Pressfield went on a podcast called the Rich Roll Podcast, and Steven was talking about all this. And Rich Roll began to ask questions, and Steven Pressfield said, "You got to meet my rabbi." I got a call out of the blue. I went down. Rich Roll said, "Never talked to a rabbi." And I said, "I've never been on a world-famous podcast. I've been on a few others, but not that stature." He and I had a great conversation. My wisdom courses expanded. The word got around, and Mirav and I are now in a position to start really, really spreading this wisdom. Steven Pressfield, by the way, he's the guy that entered me into a phase of my life that I could never, ever have predicted. So I told Steven I was doing this tonight, and he's very happy about it. But he has a new book out, by the way, his autobiography. And just prior to that, another book. So anything you see by Steven Pressfield. One of my favorite, by the way, is a book called The Artist's Journey. Now, that's a really great book. And The Artist's Journey is the inner life after the hero's journey. So the hero's journey gets called to action, goes to fight the dragon, gets beat, goes to the wizard, sharpens the sword, strengthens the shield, learns all the skills, defeats the dragon, saves the country, and comes back to a life of great renown and celebration. And then what happens the next day? Pressfield wrote a book on the next day. What happens when the hero comes home? Pressfield says you have to go on the artist's journey. And then he says something really interesting. Every person on the hero's journey at the same time has to be on the artist's journey, because eventually, even while you're on the hero's journey, it can wear out, it can wear thin. Our hero's journeys are not as clean as the myths that Joseph Campbell covered. Even when you're on the hero's journey, the soul is beckoning for you to go in. So for anybody who's dealing with issues of meaning, purpose, spirituality, connection with the soul, I strongly recommend Stephen Pressfield's book, The Artist's Journey. All his books on resistance are great. The Artist's Journey, I think, is exceptional. And beyond that, he's a novelist. He's written, that's actually the first novel of his that I read is, I'm going to go to the front here where they're listed, was The Last of the Amazons. I had no idea who Stephen Pressfield was. I read it, loved it. And then when I met him, I didn't know he wrote spiritual psychology. I thought he just wrote Last of the Amazons, Tides of War, Gates of Fire, which I read and loved, and The Legend of Bagger Vance. I saw the movie. So my Hanukkah gift to all of you, Stephen Pressfield, if you want to do the inner life dimension of Hanukkah, read this book. All right, that concludes my thoughts for the evening. I'll have us go to gallery view and see if anybody has a question on this teaching. So first, hi, everybody. I see Richard and Judith. Happy Hanukkah. I see Patrick and Daniela. I see Roland. Is that Sherry? Okay. Sherry, okay. Linda Esrick. I think that's Anna Fox. So thank you all of you for showing up and joining us in our Hanukkah celebration. Does anybody have a question or a thought about the idea of resistance and the connection to Hanukkah? I'll give you guys a minute to think. Okay. Everybody good? All right. So tomorrow night, Friday night, I will do Stephen Pressfield Part 2, where I will talk a little bit more about the artist's journey. It's interesting. It wasn't well known. I mean, people haven't read it. It's a really wonderful introduction to the spiritual quest. I want you to know about that. That's Friday night. Remember, Saturday, for the first time in forever, I'm going to talk about the Torah portion during Hanukkah, because in every other year, I've called that my Christmas sermon, so I never got to talk about Torah portion Miketz. And this is the first Shabbos I get to do it. I don't know how long. Shabbos afternoon, I'm going to give what I used to call my Christmas sermon, but I'm going to give the long version. What I mean by the long version, before I want to talk about the first century Judaism context in which Christianity developed, I want to ask, from a philosophic perspective, what is religion? What is spirituality? What is ethics? And then drill that down to the way that myths and metaphors shape consciousness, the myths and metaphors of first century Judaism, and how what I'm going to call, and by the way, there are Christian scholars that say the same thing, the myth and metaphor of the incarnate God, how that got established and why, what the split was, and especially what the two traditions can learn from each other. I don't mean interfaith dialogue, meaning when you study the myths and metaphors of another tradition, we always learn more about our own tradition. And I know many, many Christians who are very interested in first century Judaism and trying to understand that womb from which Christianity was born. But since I have all the time in the world, I get to start with philosophy, religion, ethics, spirituality, and then maybe at the very end. So I've posted the talk from 2 to 3:30. You can drop anytime, go out, come back, go out. I'll take questions the whole time, and feel free to join in for a little or a lot. That's going to be Shabbos afternoon, 2 to 3:30. Saturday night is the 7th day of Hanukkah. I'm going to go to Roberto Saggioli, my other great teacher. I have about 4 of them, and Stephen Pressfield is one, Roberto Saggioli is the other. Great Hanukkah teaching, because we have to have the will, as it were, to light that candle. You can think all you want. You can come up with great metaphors. You can read The War of Art. If you don't will yourself to light that candle and keep it lit, it's all for naught. So Saturday night, I'm doing Roberto Saggioli, part 1. Sunday night, 8th day of Hanukkah, Roberto Saggioli, part 2. And I will feel that I have fulfilled my desire to teach the history and text, the ritual, symbolic and metaphoric, and transformative. And it's been a wonderful Hanukkah for us doing this preparation, as the conversations around the house. We had Noam and Racheli's daughters here last night. Some of you saw them. And I was sitting in the kitchen studying the book of Maccabees for 2 hours. And they kept saying, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" I said, "I'm preparing for my talk." So I gave my talk about 15 minutes. They said, "What, you study for 2 hours to talk for 15 minutes? I said, "That's kind of how it goes." Yeah, that's exactly right. So for me to immerse myself back in the first Maccabees, the second Maccabees, into the history, reading Sfat Emet, it's a glorious time, really, to sink into the into the text, the traditions, the spiritual interpretations. It's really an extraordinary, I have to say, all of our holidays lead me on the most extraordinary journeys. And it's such a privilege to be able to share this journey with all of you.